Good evening, everybody. We would like to start because we want to be respectful of everybody's time. So take your seat. So I'm very happy to be here tonight and represent Siegal Lifelong Learning. I'm Dafna Ben-Yosef, the director of the Jewish Studies at Siegal Lifelong Learning. And I recognize some of you, so you must have visited Siegal a few times. So the topic that I chose to talk about is a Jewish perspective on patient and doctor relations. So this is the lecture outline. I will go over all of those topics. So just so you know where we are, I will start with the secular values in the healthcare system, and then I will go and talk about the religious values and how do we approach medicine in a Jewish perspective. I will talk a little bit about some of the philosophers, such as John Rawls, and how does his philosophy align with medical ethics and the patient-doctor relations. And I will give a few examples on how we make decisions in the halachic way. I will start by saying that we are a divided society in America today and also in the world. And that means that we do not agree on what is good, what is right, what is valuable. We're not able to prioritize it in the same way. And following the 30 years of religious wars, which ended in 1948, the Enlightenment has brought us to rationality. And that means that the religion has been taken out of the public discourse. H.T. Engelhardt, who was a philosopher from not so Jewish, I would say he was from the Christian bioethics, but he wrote extensively about what kind of values, what kind of moral values we should have in medicine and in bioethics. And what he said is that there is a profound disagreement over the morality of abortion, euthanasia, embryo research, and other medical ethics issues. And he said we are all moral strangers. And that means, as I said before, that we cannot agree on what is the good, the right, and the valuable. There is very thin layer of morality that we can agree upon. And as such, we are being called moral strangers, as we can see in here. And moral strangers are people who cannot agree, again, on the good, the right, the valuable, how to prioritize it, what kind of values we should have in medicine, and how which one is outweighing the other one, and so on and so forth. And as moral strangers, we need to have some kind of system, like laws and policies that help us to prioritize these things in medicine. And when we are moral strangers, and I would say the more extreme expression is moral enemies, those are people who are not even able to sit at the same table and discuss anything, we need to use something called tolerance. And in tolerance mode, what we're doing is actually acknowledging the fact that we are different, that we have differences in our opinions, in our views, and that goes also to medicine. We do not agree on how to treat a patient, how we should prioritize the beneficence of a patient, or what should be included in the autonomy of the patient, and so on and so forth. So when we are in tolerance mode, we need to remember that we are different. People are different from each other. They cannot make decisions in the same way. And this is how we manage the medical system this way. In secular medicine, we have several principles that we try to follow when we make decisions for patients. Those values, or I would say principles, are called the 4 principles of medicine or bioethics, and they are autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice. And if we were to do a survey in this room only, and I would ask you, how would you prioritize these values? Which one would you put at the top of the medical system that we should follow? And why would you prioritize it in such a way? I doubt if we would have agreement. And that really demonstrates that we are really moral strangers and we cannot prioritize things in the same way. And the advantages of those 4 principles are that they are very, very practical, seem to be very practical, and we can use them very easily in medicine and treat patients according to these values. But the disadvantages of it is that it assumes that we live in a common morality. That means that we agree on those ethics in medicine. And that is not the case, unfortunately. And this is what makes it very, very hard to make decisions in the secular system based on those values or those principles, because my autonomy is not your autonomy, and what I would consider beneficence is somebody else's maleficence, and so on and so forth. And that is becoming very, very problematic in today's system, in the secular system, from various reasons. And many times we have clashes between the different values. That means that we don't know which value would be stronger in the decision-making of medicine. And we have conflicts in those values. And when we have conflicts to make it, and we don't know what to do and how to make the decision, we have to use a system of weighing and balancing those values to make sure that we are really acting to benefit the patient, whatever that means to us or to the patient. And I'm just posing these questions, or I would say philosophical arguments here. Is there a strict ethical foundational position that forms a moral authority in healthcare? It's a very hard question today. And is this foundational position negates ethical and moral relativism? Relativism means that we acknowledge the fact that morality and ethics is not just one. We have many ethicses. And that relates to our religion, our culture, what are the norms where we live, all right? Around the world, we have different types of moralities. So is there any foundational position that negates an ethical moral relativism? And then how do we decide what is the norm? And what norms should we follow in healthcare? And I would say that it's very, very hard to make a decision in that question. And sometimes it really leads you to an existential crisis. So I would not put too much time and thought. And another question is, does religion belong in healthcare? Another very interesting question, and many views, many arguments are being made either way. Some people think that we should only rely in medicine on data that comes from different studies that are being done, and we should not draw from philosophy, from religion, from the humanities, and establish those principles in medicine. So now, if we're talking about patient and doctor relations, we have to see the history of it. And the history is such that before the 1960s, we were in what we call the paternalistic approach to patient-doctor relations. And that means that when you were to come to a doctor to make some kind of a decision, the doctor is the one who would make the decision for you. It was not you. And that was based on the fact that the doctor knows best and the patient doesn't really know anything. And this was the case until the 60s. And in the 60s, we had kind of a transition to what we call today a shared decision-making system. And that means that when a patient comes in and talks to the doctor, the decision is made together with the patient. The doctor explains, gives them all the options, and they weigh and balance together and make the decision. In some places in the world, we still have the paternalistic approach, but in the States, more and more, we have the shared decision-making and even full autonomy of the patient to make the decision for themselves. So we have all of those values, right? The autonomy of the patient, the beneficence, the non-maleficence, the justice, and those were the principles that were articulated and we tried to follow. And when we talk about the autonomy of the patient, we say that the patient has a right, all right, almost an absolute right to say, I do not want that treatment. I would rather not have the treatment, the medication, the surgery, or whatnot. And that is absolutely okay. And in the secular system, we will not make a patient do any of those things if they do not wish to do so. And I would like to ask if this is this the case in Judaism? And the answer for that is no. So about 10 years ago, there was a survey that was done. And that survey showed, that was in the United States in 2007, and that survey showed that about 62% of the population in the United States prefers the shared decision-making. And very interestingly, some of the patients, about 30% of them, which is not a small number, want to have a full autonomy over their decision-making. And that means that they are the ones who make the decisions for themselves. The doctor simply shows them all the options, and they are the ones who choose which option would be best for them based on their personal beliefs, what they want to accomplish, and so on and so forth. So we have come, I would say, to the other side of things, right? From a paternalistic approach into the shared decision-making and even full autonomy of the patient to make the decisions for themselves. And many times that brings a lot of clashes into the medical system and into the patient-doctor relations specifically. Because many times the patient would come in, right, and there would be some kind of lack of communication where the doctor talks this way, right, in this level, and then the patient is here. He doesn't understand what the doctor is saying. Another problem could be a lack of trust. Trust in these days in medicine is a big problem. Not so much in family medicine, but more in the professionalists, right? If you go, for example, to a cardiologist or pulmonary doctor or all sorts of specialties, there's not a lot of trust in the patients, in the doctors. And many times, the problem comes from the fact that the goals of the patients are very different than the goal of the doctor. For example, if a patient walks in the door and he says to his doctor, please give me a medication to cure my diabetes, everybody sees, not the patient obviously, but everybody knows that you cannot cure diabetes. So the expectations needs to be set as well, and many times they are not, which causes a lot of problems in the system. All right, so we talked about secular values, we talked a little bit about the paternalistic approach. All of that is related to the Western medicine, the secular medicine. And now we're going to touch a little bit about the religious principle, the halachic principle, principles that we're following in medicine. So of course, the overarching obligation the doctors have, not just doctors, by the way, every person who is Jewish is obligated, is to save the life of the patient. And that means that they will do everything in their power to save their lives. They will break the Shabbat every Shabbat, right? They're allowed to break the Shabbat to save a life. They will not fast in Yom Kippur if that means that they would save somebody's life. They will make the patient eat unkosher food if that's the only food that is available in order to save their life, and so on and so forth. Every prohibition that you can think of excuse me, in Judaism could be broken in the goal of saving life, except for 3 major prohibitions. You will not commit a murder to save somebody's life. You will not do any adultery, and you will not be engaged in any ancestry and betrayal in your wife, for example, and family relations. So the first one would be to save the life, almost under any circumstances, and that comes from the verse, do not stand idly by while your neighbor's blood is shed. That comes from Leviticus. We also have the obligation to preserve the dignity of the human being, to talk to a person with respect, to make sure that the patient understands that we respect them and we do not do anything to jeopardize their dignity and so on. So that's another obligation. And it's not just the doctor who has obligation, the patient has an obligation as well, and that is called hishtadlut. And hishtadlut means that the patient will do everything in their power, and we'll talk a little bit more about the hishtadlut because it's a very important concept in medical ethics from the religious point of view. What are the obligations of the patient in this system? And another value that if you are practicing medicine from a Jewish and halachic point of view is that you are also obligated as a doctor for the social responsibility. And that means that you are acting within the community, you are helping whoever you need in that community without any obligations on your end. You're obliged to do it according to the halacha. And that is the social responsibility component, and that goes for the doctor. We have another value that is a very important value in healthcare from the Jewish point of view, and that is, of course, the pikuach nefesh, right? And that comes from the shared responsibility to the community, right, from the community to its people. We also have another opinion here that comes from a rabbi from the Reform movement, and he, at the time that the Affordable Care Act was enacted, stood up and talked about it and wanted to promote it from a Jewish point of view. And what he said is, my understanding of the Jewish tradition is that healthcare is a human right and that people have the right to as much healthcare as they need to thrive, with the understanding that the term human rights really does not appear in the Bible or in any rabbinical literature. But when you distill it down, it really is a human right, right? We have obligations of the community to its people, which stands in the human right area. So the Jewish tradition also talks a lot about intentionality. And that means, what are your intentions when you are treating that patient? And will you be responsible if something goes wrong with the patient because of your treatment, if your intentions were right or wrong? So Judaism takes a lot of importance or significance in that value of intentionality. And we can see that when we want to practice medical ethics according to the Jewish tradition, we base it on duties, obligation, commandments, and reciprocal responsibility, that is the communal responsibility. And we don't have really the word right or what I'm entitled to in the biblical context and not in the Talmudic context. Another important understanding the doctors have to have, and patients need to have that too, that the healing does not come from the doctor, nor does it come from the patient. And that means that whatever you're doing, that's not really what's going to get you healed or cured from whatever disease or condition that you have. The healing comes from God, and that is the belief. The doctor knows it, the patient knows it, but it doesn't mean that the doctor is not going to do absolutely everything in their power to help that patient, as if their lives are dependent upon him. And that also goes to the patient. And another understanding, and there I'm going to tell a little bit of a story, is that if you happen to have a heavenly decree upon you from God, you will not be able to, I would say, duck your way out of it. And you should not do it. So you should not have any mischiefs or any foil sticks, right? That comes from Yiddish, in order to avoid that heavenly decree. And this is a little story about King Solomon, who was the wisest person of all, and he knew the languages of all the animals. And one day, one of his friends came in and told him, please teach me the language of the birds. So King Solomon says, absolutely not. There are many prohibitions about it. I cannot teach you. It will only bring bad things upon you. And he refused. But that person was very persistent. And at the very end, King Solomon did teach him the language of the birds. So that person was very happy about it. The next day, he walks down the street, and he hears the bird say that his chickens are going to die. So what does he do? He quickly sells them to somebody else, his neighbor. A few days later, the chickens die, but he's very happy. He now has the money. He doesn't have the chicken, so that's fine. The second day, he walks around by his cows, and he sees the birds. He hears the birds say that something is going to happen to his cows, and they're going to die in the next few days. What does he do? He quickly sells them to somebody else, another neighbor. Has the money, A few days pass away, and the cows die. Then the next day, he hears the bird say that his house is going to die, is going to burn. What does he do? He sells the house, of course, somebody else. What happens the next day? The house gets burned down to the ground, but he's very happy. He has the money. He didn't lose his house. His family is safe. The next day, he walks in, and what does he hear? The bird say that he's going to die. So what does he do? Now he can't do anything, right? He sold everything already. So he runs back to King Solomon, and he tells him, what am I going to do now? Now I'm going to die. So the king listens to his story, and he says to him, you know, you probably have a heavenly decree upon you from God. But God tried to help you. He tried to take it out on your chicken. But what did you do? You ducked your way out of it. And then he tried to do it with the cows, but you sold them too. And then he tried to help you by doing it on the house, but you sold that too. So you kind of weasel yourself out of that situation. But now I cannot do anything for you because now the heavenly decree is upon you. So you are going to die, and there's nothing that I can do to help you. So why did I tell you this story? Because I want you to remember that we cannot avoid a heavenly decree that comes upon us. And that's an important value to remember. Okay. So this is a study that shows that in a decision-making in the ultra-Orthodox society in Israel, as you can see here, we have in that relationship, the patient-doctor relationship, we have another side of it, and this is the rabbi. And I put it more in bold and larger because the rabbi actually takes a lot of the weight, and he is the one that makes the decision rather than the doctor, if you have a system that is willing to accept it. So if you look on the right, you will see that when a patient goes to see the doctor and he gets the doctor's response, if there is a disagreement with the Jewish values, the patient goes and consults the rabbi, and then the rabbi makes the final decision. If there is an agreement, right, still the patient goes and asks for the doctor's advice. And again, if the doctor's advice is in agreement, the rabbi approves the doctor's decision. But if not, it's still the rabbi's final decision. So whatever route you take, right, at the very end, it is the rabbi who makes the decision. And when you look at the title of this, it says, I would consult a doctor, but what the rabbi says goes. And that tells you who has the power in that triangle. So I want to talk a little bit about the concept of hishtadlut as a part of the patient-doctor relations. And hishtadlut means that the patient has the obligation to do everything that they can, but with some limitation. You will not, do something very, very extreme, to help yourself stay healthy. All right? And that comes from the verse, "V'nishmartem me'od lenafshotechem." Another source is Rabbi Akiva that wrote, "Hakol katuv ve'harashut netuna," right? Everything is foreseen, yet the permission is granted. And Rabbi Akiva is very, very widely quoted. And why? Because whenever he says that, that means that the patient doesn't need to do anything, right? Everything is already foreseen. We don't know it, right? Because we don't have prophecy and God does not reveal himself to us, but it's already known. So why should we do anything? And it also brings those questions here on the right. Can a human labor alter the divine plans? If all is predicted or predetermined, why should we do really any effort to help ourselves stay healthy? And is it essential for those who trust God to take action in order to attain their medical needs? Should they go and do all of that effort if it's already foreseen? And how much should hishtadlut be? Is there something that is too much hishtadlut or too little hishtadlut? Or is this really related to anything? How much effort should the patient take to take care of himself and fulfill the checkbox that he did in hishtadlut? And there are thousands and thousands of Jewish rabbis that wrote about it. and questioned it and had various opinions about it. So one of them is the Maimonides and the Nachmanides, right? Rambam and Ramban. I'm sorry, the writing is a little confused here in the Hebrew. They lived around the 12th century, and they urged, right, all of the patients, if we would call the devotees the patients, to take full responsibility over their efforts, precisely because the divine plans are incomprehensible to us. We don't know what God has planned for us. And both of them condemn the idea that those who trust in God may suffice with prayers about, food. God is going to provide me with everything that I need, either health or food or shelter. Really, this is not the case. You need to do an effort. And where does it come from? They both quote the verse, Bezeat apecha tochal lachem. And that means that you should work very, very hard to help yourself and to earn your bread. So how much ishtadlut should you do? Is there something that is too little or too much? And rabbis that comes, I think I skipped, yeah. So another rabbi, right, called Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, right, the Ramchal, what he said is, and he wrote it in the Mesilat Yesharim, the Path of the Just, that human efforts are obligatory regardless of their inability to change God's plans. So you need to do it despite the fact that it's not going to change whatever is planned for you. Very interesting point of view. Rabbis from the Musar movement also talked about the Mesilat Yesharim and supported it. And they said that hishtadlut is required from a person, and it must be carefully weighted vis-a-vis to one's spiritual level. And if you're doing too much hishtadlut, that's not good, because that shows that you don't trust in God to help you and save you. If you're doing too little hishtadlut, that says that you didn't do enough and you didn't fulfill your duty. So you really need to do just the right amount of hishtadlut. And what does that mean? It means that when you have a problem, you're going to go and see a doctor, and you're going to take the medication, you're going to do the treatment, you're going to try to follow whatever the doctor recommends, but you should not go to the extreme. You need to do what is considered the standard in your time and in your place, right? And the treatments that are available to you, right? What happens if in 10 years the medicine decides that this particular treatment is now not really beneficial and even harmful? You still did your duty. As a person, you did a hishtadlut. So the principle of autonomy, which is one of the 4 principles that we've mentioned, really does not receive the same weight in the Jewish tradition, right? There is no complete autonomy or absolute autonomy of a Jewish person over their bodies, because their bodies are just being given to them for their lifetime. And when they die, that body needs to be returned in a good place. So we should not harm the body, and we should not do any violation of, cutting the body or harming ourselves in any way. That is also forbidden. And we have a very famous, I would say, article that was written by Rabbi Zevin. Rabbi Zevin was a very creative Talmudic thinker, and he wrote extensively about different things in the halacha. And he was really, really a very creative person. And he wrote an article about the merchant of Venice, HaSocher MiVenezia. If you are not familiar, which probably you are, this is a story about Shylock, who was a Jewish moneylender, and Antonio, which takes a loan from him to help his friend. But the deal that he makes is that if he doesn't return the loan, Shylock can take 100 pounds of worth of his flesh. And what Rabbi Zevin asks is this a valid contract from a halachic point of view? And this is a very long essay where he writes and brings different views of different rabbinical thinkers. And at the very end, his conclusion is that there is no absolute autonomy over one's body. It was really something that was lended to you as a person for your lifetime. And then when the soul separates from the body, you need to be buried and return the body to the land. So what we conclude from this essay is that really you cannot make a decision of life and death alone, because you might make the wrong decision and cause harm to yourself. So you are obliged to talk to a rabbi, talk to a posek, or somebody who can help you to make the decision medically. And many times, even in Judaism, we have a conflict between two principles. And one of those conflicts could be between the autonomy of the patient and your beneficence. And if we're looking, this is just one example how these values could be conflicted. If we are looking at the fast of Yom Kippur, if we have an individual that thinks that by fasting somehow he's going to harm himself and might even die, even if the doctor does not think that this is correct, that person will still need to refrain from fasting, all right? So what does that mean? That we have the value of autonomy and the value of beneficence, and they stand one against each other. If this was the opposite, where the patient thinks that that's okay to fast, however, the doctor tells him otherwise, what will the obligation be? Would he fast or not? No. All right. So here you go. Those are two different opinions and clashes of autonomy versus beneficence, where we sometimes prioritize one and sometimes prioritize the other. So I just want to say a few more things about how do we see differently the medical care, particularly the patient-doctor relations, in the secular system versus the religious system or the Jewish system. All right? So if we have a physician who abstains from caring for a patient, this is like a spiller of blood. This is like you have committed a murder. Even if another physician is available to treat that patient, the Jewish physician must not decline a request to care for a patient, all right? And the duty of the doctor is to care for every patient that is seeking their attention, regardless of this is your patient, this is not your patient, do you have an established doctor-patient relations, and so on, which is the case really in the Western system. And Rabbi Auerbach, who was one of the poskim, ruled that if there is no risk involved, the society should impose a donation of bone marrow despite the inconvenience and even some pain. And from that ruling, another rabbi, another posek, Dr. and Rabbi Avraham Steinberg, concluded that a doctor must have a response, right? He needs to respond to every patient, even if it makes him uncomfortable or it's not really the right time for them. They need to respond. That is their obligation. And in the Western system, of course, it does not obligate you to, as a doctor, to treat any patient, right? Only if you have established relationships with that patient, you would be obliged to treat that patient. And that is a very different approach than what we see in Judaism. And the secular system might prohibit a physician from seeing a patient who are listed with another colleague, all right? Because we don't have an established relationships. Shulchan Aruch and the codes that are embedded in Shulchan Aruch says that if a non-expert doctor is practicing with the permission of the community, and this is the communal responsibility, but accidentally harms the patient, he is protected from paying him damages. And now probably a few secular doctors would like to turn back into the Jewish system, which is more protective. However, if the same accident would occur with an expert operating without permission, right, of the local authority, what will happen? Very bad thing, right? You could face even the loss of your license, right? And the doctor could be taken out of the system. There will be a very big lawsuit against the hospital, and they would win. So this is a very different approach, as you can see, from the secular system. The Jewish and the secular are very different. What about issues of disclosure? Disclosure is a big thing in medical care, especially in the Western system, but everywhere. And in the halachic thought, is a doctor obligated or prohibited from disclosing confidential medical information in order to spare an innocent person significant harm? So here is something very, very unique to the Judaism. And I'm quoting Rabbi Waldenberg, who published it in 1985. Whenever awareness of a medical condition is certain to change a marriage choice, a shidduch, right? If that could make or break the marriage, even if the prospective bride or groom does not approach the doctor asking about the medical condition of the candidate partner, the doctor must communicate the information to those people, right? Because this will protect the other person from a substantial harm. In secular medicine, if there are any issues of disclosure, the doctor would never, ever disclose any information of the patient. And that is another difference that we have from those systems. So the secular medicine mandates you, or I would say obliges you as a doctor, to give all the information, to disclose everything to the patient when you are treating a patient and he has to go through a treatment or some kind of maybe a procedure, right? You cannot hold information, right? You need to give enough information, all the information based on facts, and you have to have full disclosure. You cannot withhold any information or any side effect, as little as it could be. And really, there shouldn't be a deception in that area. So you need to say the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, all right? Until even up to the smallest detail. However, in the Jewish perspective, many times the truth-telling can cause harm, right? And in those cases, there are many rabbinical authorities that say you should not disclose information that will cause the patient any harm. All right? You are allowed not to tell the patient that they're going to die, that they only have a few months to live, that there is no treatment for them, and to deprive them from the hope. That is forbidden to do halachically. So you can see that Shulchan Aruch and later commentators forbade the communication of bad medical news to patients in a fragile condition, of fear of mental disturbance that might compromise their chances to survive. And that is the Jewish approach to it. And in the secular system, of course, you cannot do that. You have to disclose the information, you have to give it to the patient. And we have a concept that is called even truth dumping, right? Truth dumping, as you can see up here, where in the 5 or 7 minutes that the patient walks into your office, as a doctor, you have to give them all the information and make sure you haven't forgotten anything, right? And that confuses the patient, that overwhelms the patient. Many of the patients would then refuse to sign a consent for whatever treatment, right? But that is, anyhow, what is being done. However, the Jewish system works differently, and they will allow not to tell the patient all of the things and disclose everything because you don't want to harm the patient. And where does it come from? It comes from a few sources, as we can see in here. One of them is that we say that hope should always be given to the patient, even when you are about to die and you recite the prayer of confession. What does it say? It says, may it be your will to heal me completely, right? Even on the verge of death, you are still having hope that God will help you and rescue you from dying. And we have this story that comes from Isaiah 38, where the king became very, very ill, and the prophet came to him. Are we 4 minutes? Oh my God. All right. So the king came to him, and told him that he was about to die. And how did he respond? He said to him very, very harshly, he said, "Son of Emotz, stop your prophesying and leave. I have a tradition from my grandfather, which is the King David. Even if a sharp sword is placed over your neck, one should not refrain from praying for mercy." And that comes from Psalm 31. All right, so because we don't have a lot of time, and I would like to talk a little bit about some examples, with your permission, I will just skip a few things so we can get to the good stuff. All right. So these are just a few examples of what we call in halachic thinking casuistry. And that means that we are looking at previous rulings that have been done by other rabbis, and we are applying those principles to the case that we have in front of us today. And one of them is called din rodef, right, or the pursuer, the judgment or something like that, the pursuer, if I try to translate it. And that comes from the Mishnah. Whenever somebody comes to kill you and you feel a threat to your life, you are allowed to kill that other person. And how do we draw from that into medicine? We can use it to say that it is justified if, in a condition of pregnancy, if the baby or if the fetus is somehow harming the mother, either mentally or physically, we are allowed to abort the baby under those circumstances. So we use the din rodef in medicine, and we talk, and we can even extend it to more things, even if there is a genetic problem with the patient, with the baby. This could also be used as a justification for an abortion. Another discussion is coming from Yoma, Masechet Yoma, and that is a debate about how do we determine death. So if you have a person that happened to be laying down and some building collapses upon them, and this is all happening on Shabbat of all days, how would you determine if that person is alive or not? Because if he is alive, even on Shabbat, you're going to do everything to dig him out and help him to save his life. However, if he's already dead, you will not do it until the Shabbat is out, right? That is the judgment, and that is the law in halacha. So there are different opinions and different approaches about it. And the Talmud asks, how much of the body should we uncover to make sure that that person is alive or not? And some of the rabbinical thinkers say that it's only up to the nose, because the nose is where you can see and feel the breathing, right? And some of the rabbis say you have to dig him out up to his chest, because we want to see the heart and the chest going up and down, and that way we can determine whether that person is alive or not. But then Rashi comes in and says, what if the person is buried upside down with his feet up and the head down? Should we still dig only up to the chest, because the chest will be first, right? So there are different approaches to it, but this is basically a debate that we draw upon to make a decision of how to determine if somebody is alive or dead, right? So I think our time is up for that. And I just want to say thank you very much. And if anybody have any questions, I would be very happy to answer.